Just like predicates, functions allow composing complex functions together. We can chain these functions to create a superior functionality. Function has two default methods and then encompose, along with a static method called identity. In this video, we will look at how these methods can come handy when creating a chain of functions. We know a function takes in a single argument of type t and returns a result of type r. Let's see how we can use and then default method to start with. Say we have two functions, a function defined to fetch employee's manager given an employee, and a second function returning manager's personal assistant, still an employee though, given a manager as input. So we call these functions as manager finder and assistant finder. Look at the input. So given an employee, we are returning the manager, and given a manager, we are returning the personal assistant to that manager. Look at the types. Given an employee, we are returning the manager. Given a manager, we are returning the employee. So we can club these two functions together using the and then method which we discussed earlier. This gives us a new function which is a composed function. This is our manager finder composed to assistant finder. The return of this function is a new function, but the types are a little bit confusing. Let's see how we can define them. The manager finder will be invoked first, followed by the assistant finder. And that's the reason we use called and then, which says invoke first manager finder and then assistant finder. So given an employee, manager will be found using the manager finder. And this manager finder is going to give the input to the second function, which is the assistant finder. Given the manager, his personal assistant can be located using the assistant finder. Make a note of the order of functions when using and then method. The order will be exactly like mentioned it here from left to right. Manager finder followed by assistant finder. Did you notice the function types in the composed function? That is these two. Make sure you get them right. Basically, it's the input and output of these two functions. So the input of the function manager finder and the output of the assistant finder. Remember, the and then is composed between these two functions. The output of the manager finder is passed in as an input to the assistant finder. So that is, the output of the first function becomes the input of the second function. In an essence, you have the composed function which says, given an employee, find another employee. Finding out the manager is an intermediary step. Now, what if our requirement is to find an employee working under a manager when we know the manager himself? We can create another function for finding exactly like this, or we could use the existing functions to create a new function that we can put to work. We need to first execute the assistant finder to find the assistant given her manager, and then get to the employee as we know who is the manager of that employee. We can do this easily by invoking another default method defined on the function interface, a compose method. Let's see how we can use the compose method here. As you can see, we have reversed the order. The assistant function will be invoked first, followed by the manager finder. So the compose function always executes first. This function returns a new function. The difference here is that the manager finder function will be executed first, followed by the assistant finder. Remember, exactly opposite happened in the earlier case. So the compose method first executes the after function given an argument to the method followed by this function. Did you notice the static method identity on the function itself? This identity static method is used to return the same input as an output. If we give a string say ABCD, we get the same output as input when we execute the function. Here's the way it works. We create a function called ID, which basically using the method identity static method on the function. Notice that when we use the identity method, the arguments must be of the same type. Once we have the ID function created, we can simply use the apply method on the ID function to get the result back. The result is nothing but what we have passed in. Have a look at the implementation of the method if you are really curious in the Java doc. To wrap up, in this lesson we learned how to compose functions. We seen chaining of the functions using and then and compose default methods, learned about the identity function as well.